Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week of our Race Matters class. I always listen out of my window for the bells of St. Andrews. That's how I know it's time to get started here on LR's campus. So as always, we are going to enjoy conversation with our two fabulous guests for this evening. We're going to have the opportunity to ask and get some questions answered, and we'd like for y'all to be a part of that process. So at the bottom of your screen there, make use of that Q&A function. We may not get to all questions, but whenever you ask the questions, those tend to be the richest for us, for Dr. Carol and I, to have that opportunity to talk about what you want to talk about as students in this class. To respect your time, we'll end right at 7 o'clock. And one of our guests, Miss Davis, who you'll meet very shortly, she'll be able to join us until 6:50 this evening. So we'll lose her a little bit early, but I'm hoping that we can talk Dr. Luhrs into spending those last 10 minutes with us, even if she has to go early. So we'll make the session available on YouTube tomorrow, and you can always continue the conversation in the comments section there. And without further ado, Dr. Carol, will you please introduce our guest professor for this week?
It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Ryan Luhrs. He has a PhD in choral conducting and music education from Florida State University. He currently directs the a cappella choir, the university's touring flagship choral ensemble. He also coordinates the sacred music program. He mentors choral music education students, and he directs the college singers and teaches a protest music course in the university's core offerings. He is very busy. Previously, Dr. Luhrs taught music at Andrew College in Cuthbert, Georgia, and in public schools in Iowa and Minnesota. He has served as a church choir director and an organist for congregations in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Georgia, and is currently music director and organist at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Hickory. Luhrs is also the artistic director and conductor for the Hickory Choral Society. A proponent of using singing in groups to break down social barriers, Dr. Luhrs has organized choral festivals in rural Minnesota, southwestern Georgia, Tallahassee, Florida, and Hickory. His doctoral dissertation, entitled Singing for Social Harmony, Choir Member Perceptions During Intergroup Contact, investigated how choral music functions in settings where people of diverse backgrounds are present. Related research was the basis for an article he published in the February 2017 Choral Journal and presentations at regional and national conferences of the American Choral Directors Association and Chorus America. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ryan Luhrs. Thank you. And now we will have Dr. Newton introduce Ms. Davis.
Another Seminole here with us this evening. So Ms. Nicole Davis is a second-year PhD student at the Florida State University. Over the years, she has conducted academic, performance, and sacred vocal ensembles, participated in community theater. Favorite production, Ms. Davis?
The one I'm not in.
Okay. It was a surprise. I didn't tell her I was going to ask that question. She has arranged pop a cappella choral music and developed a music literacy curriculum for secondary choral classrooms. Nicole's favorite teaching experiences include her time on the Yakima Indian Reservation. Will you please, did I pronounce that correctly? I also did not. Yakima, thank you. The Yakima Indian Reservation. Her experiences with diverse people groups continues to inform her research, service, and performance. Her most recent accomplishments include presenting at the 2021 NAFME. I think I learned how to pronounce that acronym from Dr. Luhrs' lecture correctly. Eastern Conference, and acceptance of 2 conference proposals for spring 2022. So she's been busy too. Ms. Davis has been artistic director and conductor of the Thomasville Singers since 2015. And before returning for her PhD, Ms. Davis served as choral director at Thomas County Central High School in Thomasville, Georgia. Ms. Davis earned her bachelor's degree from Pensacola Christian College in music education and master's degrees, plural, in music education. She has both an MA and an MS in music education from both Pensacola Christian College and Florida State University. We are so thrilled to have you with us here tonight, Ms. Davis. And so we can just jump right in, Dr. Luhrs. We can jump right into questions, or did you have comments for us here this evening to get us started?
I think we should jump into questions.
I'm
good with that.
I like it.
All right, well, I got some questions. We have some questions. So this first question is kind of twofold. I'm going to ask you to think about this kind of nationally. Then I'm going to ask you to think about this in the context of our Lenore-Rhine community. So as we learn this week through our learning materials, there is a compelling case for the power of music to draw people together. Do you think communal singing is a path toward healing divisions in our nation at this moment? And if so, in what forms or contexts? And then I'll ask you to follow up about how you see singing connecting people and building community on our own LR campus.
Yeah, I do think communal singing has an important role to draw people together. I think in my first lecture, I talked about unique qualities of singing and how it connects humans in so many ways. But as partial as I am to music, especially singing, I think art as a whole and expressing ourselves individually helps us feel more human as we do that. And I think it helps us as we watch other people do that, we recognize them and their full humanity through that. So I think the more that we're expressing ourselves through the arts, I think the more we will heal as a nation. And the less we do that, the less we express ourselves or do so in harmful ways, the more we'll continue to see ourselves be divided. Yeah, I just think the more we can, especially communities that are marginalized, in the protest music class that I teach, one thread that seems to run through all the protest movements, or almost all of them, is a feeling that the people who are protesting aren't recognized as fully human, and they respond with art. And it seems like those are some of the most powerful moments of turning people's hearts, when they show their art and can show they're truly who they are on the inside, and the rest of the world can see that through their art.
I'm muted. Let me follow up. I said, thanks for that. That's a great response. And I just wonder, can you think about it a little just more locally and personally with our own Lenore-Rhine community, and just how you have used singing and just connecting people in our community or building community? And maybe even consider discussing the LR choir singing, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll begin by saying some of the times the most meaningful moments on campus haven't been with the rehearsed choirs that I lead, but we've had vigils in the aftermath of tragedy. I think we had a shooting on the UNC Charlotte campus a few years back, and we had students who were impacted by that here, who were classmates with those who were killed. And we had a vigil, and we sang. We didn't rehearse anything. We just sang together, and it was a real meaningful moment. And we don't want tragedy to happen, but it felt that was a powerful moment. I had another one of those moments when I was a student at Florida State in the aftermath of a shooting, where we sang together. So those are moments where we're grieving or we have fear, and I sense that music really played an important role. When it comes to Lift Every Voice and Sing, the story there is that we were invited by Terry Phillips, the a cappella choir was to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing for the celebration MLK Day and Black History Month. And it was, I think, overall a really impactful experience, because not everybody was comfortable doing that. I mean, there was even, and Terry and I talked about this at length, he even got resistance from people like, why would you have the a cappella choir? Was that the best representation of, or to celebrate Black culture? We are definitely a primarily white ensemble. I'm definitely white. And to sing words that the we and us are from the voices of African Americans in their struggle, especially verse 2. And so while there was some some resistance from some of whether or not we should sing that, and there were good conversations, and there was encouragement to sing it. In the end, for an academic institution, where it's difficult in some contexts to have and to use the word race, like our article talked about, and not have it be taboo, it was a great opportunity, I think, to have a meaningful dialogue and conversation. We didn't have to force it upon the students. We could, because there was chatter going on about whether or not we should be doing it, we could have a natural conversation could flow out of that. And in the end, I think it was good, even though we still have work to do, and there's still things I could have taught it better when I introduced the piece, and I acknowledge that to the students. We provided some context. I provided some context, but it was kind of that. All right, I checked the context box. Let's go on and learn the music, and then carry on, because I know I'm supposed to do that because I've done my work in terms of knowing the rules I'm supposed to follow when I'm teaching music from another tradition. But I didn't have that at the forefront the whole time, so it was a learning experience for me, and hopefully for the students as well.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, I'll follow up. You mentioned the article and just the discussion of it being taboo to talk about race and how that plays out in classrooms broadly, but more particularly in music education classrooms. So just put a bookmark there. We're going to come right back to that because I want to now bring Ms. Davis into the conversation for this topic. And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how you have used music or see singing to connect others and build community.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. As you heard from my bio, I have experience in public school education. Most of my formal education has been public education, except for my first 2 degrees. And what I found from that is that music allows us to talk about topics that we probably would not have otherwise. And I would say for a long period of time. Like if I'm programming something for the end of the semester, we've got 13 weeks to really dig into the poetry, the people, the culture, and all of the things that you could consider rather than just maybe a week discussion or a day or something like that. So I find typically whether I'm performing music, and this is big air quotes for me, from another culture or not, I find that I try to connect the students in multiple ways. Students and singers is the same word for me because I'm a music educator. Connect the students on multiple points to that music, whether they identify with the composer and the poetry or not. That becomes a safe space to discuss those things, because all of that is considered when we're trying to show appreciation for the culture that's represented in the music, because music is storytelling, art is storytelling. And I think as a Black female musician, it has always been my job to tell the story mostly of white men. And I have never been given the opportunity to say, no, that's not my story. I can't tell it. So I've been pushing back against that and say, well, if I can tell your story, you can tell mine. And if we can tell our stories, so we can tell theirs, because if that's what music really is, then it should be afforded to everyone. So I think if we just keep kind of pushing the boundaries of like, what's appropriate for me to study, if it's written down, and again, we can talk more maybe about written versus unwritten art. But yeah, if it's written and it's from someone from that culture, then that means they want you to perform it. That's kind of one of my base rules of that.
That's awesome. And I also want to return to that, but there was a question that came up in the Q&A. I think it goes back to Dr. Luhrs talking about music as one of the things that can kind of bring us together, including like in times of turmoil, is what you referenced. But divisiveness is a kind of turmoil in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, do you think that one reason why America is more polarized is because we don't have this culture of creating together, of singing together, of having these communal activities as much as maybe we did, not to romanticize history, but would you agree that we do it less than maybe we did at other times in our history? And is that part of the problem?
Yeah, I would argue maybe that the fact we don't have really a folk song tradition that everybody knows. How many songs can every American sing together? I mean, to really share it across. When we have these gatherings, we sing Amazing Grace a lot, and not everybody is Christian, and not everybody wants to sing about grace, but that seems to be a go-to. piece of music that we sing almost regardless of the context because it's widely known. Our national anthem is hard to sing, but yeah, I wonder what that says about us. I guess what it says about us that we don't have a handful, a body of songs that everybody knows and could sing on a moment's notice when I think most other cultures do.
I think Ryan's right, in a sense that we don't have a central form of folk music because America has been like this melting pot of a lot of different cultures, right? And because like in his first lecture, he pointed out the erasure of people in history and just kind of this refusal of like, this is the music that we study. If it's from Western Europe, then it's good enough for us to study. If it's not, we're going to push it aside. So there was a very intentional moving aside of cultures in music in America. And I think that's why we no longer have a set form of music. Because when I was growing up, I'm 36, I'm not that older, we did learn folk songs in school, but we learned patriotic American, maybe Midwestern folk songs, if anything, or like New England, right? It wasn't Southern folk songs, because that would have been spirituals. And why in Florida would you learn those? Anyway, so to make the point, there was, and then we've been moving away from that, and there's this weird hierarchy, but I think the intentional erasure is part of the reason why we don't have a central folk music tradition in America.
And if I could add one more thing to that, when you think about values of Western art music, Western European art music, there's the performer and the audience. You have people who are trained. And people, I even asked the singers I lead in college, how many of you consider yourself a singer? And only half the choir will raise their hand because they're afraid, well, I'm not sure. They don't want to be that contestant on American Idol who has 20 million views because we get entertainment as Americans to watch that person and how bad they are. So nobody wants to be that. Nobody wants to come close to that. So maybe we draw back and leave the music making to the professionals and then don't engage within it ourselves.
That's interesting. And I think maybe a little bit later, we'll come back to the vulnerability that you hinted at before, Dr. Luhrs, of making music and using the R word, as the author of the reading that you had us do for this week said. So race, talking about race involves some vulnerability. But Ms. Davis, I have a question for you. So talking about creating music, and then you had big air quotes for from a culture, from another culture. I want you to elaborate on those air quotes. And then,
sure.
So Dr. Luhrs kind of got at this a little bit. He said music is one of those ways of getting into or being exposed to cultures that are different from our own. And maybe I should be using air quotes too, as I say that, in a way that kind of reminded me of tourism. I like to travel, but I know that there's a better way to travel that does less harm to the host country, and that there's a worse way to travel that does do harm. And so I'm wondering if, in the those air quotes, can you talk about what tips you have to offer for engaging across cultures?
Sure. I think one of the points I typically make in my presentations are that race and culture are not the same word, but they are often used interchangeably, right? So we'll say, oh, this person's from another culture, but they're not. They're just another race, right? If I'm sitting next to another 36-year-old in America who grew up in Florida, we're going to have a lot in common. We're going to have a lot of similar cultures. But if someone sees us, they'll go, oh, look at those two women from different cultures talking. No, that is not no. So when I look at that in the context of music education, often I have been educated in Western European music over and over again. We've listed, this is my 4th college degree. And last summer I took a Baroque music history class, and I was like, maybe they'll name some of the people I haven't heard of before. There were 2 weeks on J.S. Bach. Is he fantastic? Sure, I've been told he is. I know he's great. But however, there were also people from Latin America, from Africa, from Eastern Europe, all creating music at this time during the Baroque era that we could have heard about. And they got 1 week's lecture at the very end for us to dump all of those people in. And I was like, why? That's not diversity. That's not inclusion. That's just diversity. That's just kind of check mark. This is what we're doing. all of those people, even if you're talking about an enslaved person who became free in Germany during that time or something like that, then they had the same, like a cultural onset about the same as Bach. Then they weren't from another culture. They were also creating Baroque, classical, like European music, but we treat it like it's this other thing. So when I say music from another culture, I'm addressing the fact that very few people I know are German with over 20 kids who work in a Lutheran church. Okay, fine, Ryan, and and write music for every Sunday for 5 years. Like, no one has this exact same culture as Bach, but we'll perform that without a problem. And then we'll take another American composer and we'll go, oh, that's from another culture. They probably identify with more cultural aspects from an American author of a different race than they ever would a Western European composer. But it's like making people see that. It's been one of the biggest struggles of all of my presentations. If someone's saying, oh, but that's from another culture, I go, no, you have more in common with Andre Thomas than you do with J.S. Bach every day of the week. Every day of the week. Yet you go, that's a different culture, I can't. It took us time to learn the practices of Western music. We have to take the same amount of time to learn about the music from other cultures, erased cultures.
You got around to talking about that too in your lecture on music education too, Dr. Luhrs. Do you have anything else that you want to say that dovetails with this area of I like the distinction between diversity and inclusion. And just now, Dr. Luhrs, you said, the checkbox is a mentality. How do you do it right? So we know how not to do it. What does it look like when it's done well? A question for both of you.
I'll let Ms. Davis go again if she wants.
Well, why don't you let me chime in and draw from one of the articles
Yep.
had us read to maybe give a little more context to think about it in. So in the Bradley text, the author says, if we can overcome the taboo about naming race in discussion and begin to talk more knowledgeably and confidently about racial issues, we can begin to make our music education praxis more racially equitable and social just. So this author is clearly arguing that, first of all, we need to be comfortable talking about race. And my question is, like, how do you what guides you as you lead students in exploration of these topics? And Dr. Luhrs, you talked a little bit about your experience with the Lift Every Voice and Sing and kind of reflecting on what could you have done differently? How could you have not just checked the box? But I'd love for you to maybe unpack a little more about just what you were thinking. Did you see yourself as checking the box as you were preparing students? Or did you see yourself as just making a sincere effort to try to provide some sort of context? So kind of like what guides you as you provide context for students when they're singing something that is, and since we're using the air quotes, from a different culture or really foreign to them, because that was the students' argument and Lift Every Voice and Sing. They're like, this isn't us. How can we sing this? How can we sing this song? We don't know this experience.
Right. Well, in that case, it was consulting with people beyond me and talking with our director of multicultural affairs. I mean, he was key. We met a couple times to talk about what do you see? And he continued, like, Ryan, I see, we agreed this was a learning opportunity for everybody involved and shouldn't shy away. And he saw the symbolism of us singing it. He wanted that. He knew what I looked like and what the choir looked like and thought it could be good for our community to see that group of singers in that space singing that piece of music. It's interesting that you talk about the checking the box and how I might be thinking and how we catch ourselves. I teach a Foundations of Music Education class, and we were talking of the reason, we're making the argument why we needed to talk about diversity in that class. And one of them I made was, primarily, I want you to all make sure you keep your jobs, meaning, I don't want you to step. And I reflected on that and thought, that's that's the wrong way to look at this. We came back to that topic. It's not about just preserving your jobs and avoiding saying the wrong thing so you get yourself in trouble. In that case, we're in the business of teaching students, and it should be because it's in their best interest in preparing teachers. So, but that I caught myself there like that. I have had that mindset. I need to do and say what I need to do to avoid something bad happening to my career or my job, and that's probably not the best way to approach one's work.
And I really appreciate your just transparency and vulnerability there, because it's not easy work. And I think that that's kind of what the article is getting at. You know, yes, we want to be inclusive. Yes, we want to see music as music and not, you know, just checking the boxes to make sure we have everyone's music represented. And I like that you're thinking through it, because there probably isn't a pat answer to it. You know, I think how you approach creating context for students has a lot to do with who you are, your experiences, what you're comfortable with. And I think that's the case, you know, across disciplines, even beyond music, whether it's literature or, you know, whenever we're trying to be more inclusive in our curriculum, it first takes the instructor to have a certain positionality themselves. And I just wonder, is your kind of approach to connecting cultures through music evolving? Do you have like a fixed position, or like, how are you all kind of navigating this space?
I'd especially like to hear what Ms. Davis has to say too on this question.
Sure. I've got been developing some things. I would like to say, most importantly, it's not easier for me to do this just because I'm a person of color, because my education has been just as Eurocentric as Ryan's. Dr. Luhrs, sorry. And so for that reason, I have had to work the things that he put in the first lecture. I maybe learned those things in the last 2 years, and I had to find it all myself. I had to go digging because it was never going to show up in the curriculum of the classes that I was taking, which is quite frankly ridiculous. And it's something that I'm not quiet about. Can you imagine me not being quiet? But that being said, I think we have to acknowledge that it takes extra time from the instructor to find this information because of the very intentional erasure that is happening, like the information that is tucked away. So even when spirituals were in vogue to perform, and it was like the right thing to do to put it at the end of your concert, which is something else I'm fighting, is the fact that it was performed very happily so that it was easier to swallow, and it was just this big concert pleaser. And now people go, well, I can't do that because I don't understand the culture, and I'm not one of these people, and I don't want to be accused of cultural appropriation. So there are some, I think, steps that we can take that get us closer to cultural appreciation, which I think is really as close as we can ever get. Authenticity is hard to achieve. It's also expensive, and possibly even impossible. So you have to be the people that music was written for, fluent in the original language, performing in the correct uniform attire at the right time of day. Like, if you're talking authenticity, go all the way or don't go, right? And so, however, if you can't make it that far, you don't want to go, well, I guess I'm just appropriating now. That's a bad word these days. We don't want to do that. So the tip for appreciation is the acknowledgement that you don't know as much as you need to know right now. And then you make every attempt to know as much as you can before that concert date. So you're reaching out, like Ryan said, to culture bearers, to people from that culture who understand the significance of the text. If they look at the music and say, oh, we would actually never sway to this music at all, then you go, my culture bearer said that you don't sway. Even if the music that writes sway right, you don't do it. And now someone else from the same ethnic group, they might sway in their version of it, right? But that's not your culture bearer. So then in your program notes, you say, I have had extensive conversations with someone from this culture, and they told me the significance of this text to their people, and all of those things. So if someone at that point accuses you of cultural appropriation, well, then they're just a liar and they're not a nice person. But you know whether you've done the work, and it's about intention. I don't think you can judge someone else's cultural appropriation. You can only judge your own. But as we can get as much appreciation as possible and be as scholarly as possible and put our information down on where we got it from, I think that's going to change it, because we can't wait for only Black people to perform music by Black people, because there are not very many Black music professors in the United States. I'm not even one yet. So if you're waiting for me to perform all the music, then even so, if I am a Black person with an all Black choir, then my audience will also be all Black. Guess what? They already know the music. I'm not teaching anybody anything. So we do have to make space for predominantly white choirs with white conductors to perform music by people that are other races. Otherwise, we're not going to see it, because the platform still belongs to white males. And if they're willing to do the work like Dr. Luhrs, then I say, welcome. Thank you for doing the work. We need you.
This is very much a forced choice that may not be valid, but Ms. Davis, would you rather see it done badly or not done at all?
That's a good question. It depends. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna try to be very diplomatic. Give me a moment. There are a lot of factors to good and bad. I will say, if I am familiar with the conductor of the program and I know that they had the resources and time to perform it well, as in I have seen them perform other music well. So I know that they have the capability to do research and apply musical performance attributes, then I expect them to apply that same technique and passion and scholarship to everything they perform. If there's someone who doesn't have that level, then great, thank you for trying. That's appreciation. That is the best you can do. The best you can do is the best you can do. But I guess based on the level of that conductor performer, then I would love for everything to be at the same level of appreciation.
That was a grace-filled answer that gave space to people and both held people to account. I really appreciated that. Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Okay, anything to add to that, Dr. Luhrs, or any thoughts on that? Okay. We have a question. We have a few coming into the Q&A. So let's go there for a second. So this is a music education question from Shirley Brockenborough. And her question is, should we include strategies for preparing the teachers with skills and strategies to take to the classroom as they identify the same elements of music, presenting and contrasting styles? And she gives as an example, Lift Every Voice, Roland Carter arrangement, which includes many of the European styles, is taught most of the time. Any thoughts on that? It sounds like the question is about preparing teachers with skills and strategies, while also looking at music, I guess, written from different perspectives and different experiences. Any takers on that one?
I'll try. So Roland Carter is an African-American composer who composes in written Western European style. So this kind of goes into a question that I've been asking, that we've been asking the course I'm taking, is what is Black music? Is Black music, is Black music only spirituals, jazz, blues, and gospel? Or is Black music anything that a Black person writes? And that's a good question, and I'm not going to answer it for you. So, but there are many Black composers who do discuss it, and William Grant Still talks about it. Undine Smith Moore talks about it. Julius Eastman talks about it. I recommend looking up their interviews, and they all say different things. They have different answers, which is interesting because they're all Black composers. And I bet if we asked Roland Carter, who I just met a couple months ago, he would give even a different definition of what is Black music. So Roland Carter, probably being familiar with the traditional form of Lift Every Voice and Sing, had some reason of setting it the way that he did. As he is living, we could contact him and find out that reason. And I think that's what's best to do with a living composer. But I would love actually to hear Ryan talk about something about this wrote versus written, because originally Lift Every Voice and Sing, and a lot of protest songs, a lot of spirituals, a lot of gospel was wrote to music. And there is I feel like a philosophical reason to writing it, and in writing it in certain styles that possibly Ryan could speak to.
Right, as we talk about Lift Every Voice and Sing, I wonder, as you were mentioning Roland Carter, and we got to sing at the American Choral Directors Association conference, opening concert with him conducting 500 people in Lift Every Voice and Sing in Raleigh just a couple months ago. And it was actually a version of him conducting the Winston-Salem State University Chorus just a couple years ago that I showed the choir. And I wondered, actually, after I showed that version of a predominantly, or an HBCU, and almost all black choir singing that, if that's part of what my students saw and go, well, we don't look like that. Should we be singing? So I just share that. That's not really answering your question, Ms. Davis, but that it came to mind as we talk about that particular arrangement. I wonder how much does a black composer need to use the devices such as Western compositional practices to get the music out to more people. More people are singing Lift Every Voice and Sing because it's not being taught by rote. One could argue, perhaps, right, that you can publish. You're using the system and the structures that are in place to disseminate music and get it out to a wider audience. So I wonder if that's, the goal. I'm not saying his goal was to make money off it or get published, but to have a wider audience, to get music, to get that message that's in that, to get more people singing those texts, singing that text and singing that music for the betterment of society, for the story that's being told, and more people getting a chance to hear that story.
Right, and I feel like we're openly speculating again because the composer is living.
Exactly.
Fast. But I think it speaks back to what Ryan pointed out, is that rote and folk music has been historically downplayed in music education, right? Mm-hmm. Rote music and folk music is for children. And then once you get to a certain state and a certain point, then you're reading written music. So is it for a legitimization of music, or is it to send it out to more people and make it more accessible? I feel like sometimes music is written down and in notation just so people are able to access it across cultural barriers, if you will, because I can listen to choral music from India, but if it's not written down in Western notation, I can't access it. So then I have to wait for someone to do that for me, and I go, thank you for doing that. Now I'm able to represent your culture in my classroom, because before I could play a recording, but we couldn't interact with it vocally until someone translated it for me, quite frankly, because I wouldn't feel comfortable teaching a song from India by rote.
So interesting. When you were talking about that in your lecture, Dr. Luhrs, you drew a parallel between Dr. McComb's observation from the very first week of our class that written language is kind of put more on a pedestal in the colonized culture of the United States versus more of an oral tradition or spoken word. It seems like that parallel extends here, that as a way of reclaiming some power, fluency with the written word became a tool that was very important, especially during after emancipation and during Reconstruction, for some powers to be reclaimed. So I wonder if and reclaiming that power through written word didn't necessarily undermine the power of the spoken word. Maybe I would like to believe that. Do you think that there's a similar case that can be made, that the note versus rote approach to music, that just because you adopt note ways of representing music, that it doesn't necessarily undermine the rote tradition of them, the rote history?
Yes and no. It goes back to intentionality again. If we want to make the parallel to literacy and music literacy, right? There are some forms of, when you think back to literacy and slaves being kept from learning how to read. That was a power balance thing, right? If they taught a slave to read, the slave would become more powerful, be able to protect themselves better in that culture where they were. So enable to keep them from coming to power, it was keep them from reading. So when it was Lowell Mason's goal that, we focus on Western European notation, we don't focus on rote music. To me, that's also very intentional, and that still shows up in music educational practices now, when we have music that maybe should be taught by rote and could be improvised on. We don't learn those skills in music ed at all, ever, unless you take a jazz class or a gospel choir or a world music ensemble. Don't get me started on that phrase. But one of those things, you don't learn how to improvise without written notation. Intentionally at first, and now just out of habit, there's a barrier between oral skills, like oral skills and oral tradition versus written notation, where people who are good at one don't feel like they can do the other. That still exists.
It still exists. Even recently as 2016, the executive director of our National Organization for Music Education, NAFME, said in a board meeting, and this got lots of press and he had to step down the next day as a result, but said, the reason we don't have as much diversity is because Blacks and Latinos don't have the keyboard skills to make it in this profession. As if to say, yeah, they can do really well. They can do really well with the performance piece. But when it comes to the literacy and the theory, they're not making it, they're not ascending through the profession up to the board level for our national organization. And there was quite a response to that, and he's no longer the executive director of our National Organization for Music Education.
That sounds dramatic, very, very dramatic. What a thing to say. And it probably wasn't fair of me to say or to insinuate that written language didn't undermine oral tradition. It probably did. It probably did force more toward one direction than the other. So yeah, that's it's an interesting controversy in your field. And so, like, in the vulnerability of talking about race and getting it very wrong in some circumstances, can we talk a little bit more about how do come back to that question about what does it look like when we do it right? I'm thinking, so last night, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she talked about diversity, but not inclusion, right? So the slightly sanctimonious inclusion of Black voices as an attempt to, in some cases, overcorrect historical injustices, valorizing Black characters as either magical or as completely obsessed just with like social justice activism. She talked about the children's book, A is for Activism, and that's great. But, I also want to see a kid like, who looks like my kids just make a dirt pie or something like that. That's just as dehumanizing in some ways as historical portrayals of Black people as animalistic. And she advocated for normalizing Black voices and characters in an ordinary way as a move toward justice. So rather than that overcorrection that we can sometimes see. And Dr. Luhrs, you defined in your lecture representation as being seeing yourself as what's accepted as normal, not necessarily good, but normal. What does normal diversity look like in a program of music or music education? Either of you. I'd love both of you. I'd love to hear from both of you for this.
Well, I'll go quickly. And first of all, I've really found it hard to find a good definition for representation. I was kind of finding it from various pieces, at least in this context. And I know what taxation without representation means, and from history class, and it relates. But I was shooting from the hip a little bit with trying to understand that and finding different ways of visualizing that. I guess for me, normal diversity means we're not having to use that word. Where different stories are being told, and that's normal. You don't have your last chapter of the book is dedicated to diversity, the stories are being told all the way through. And it's really, and you did this to me a little bit in this talk here, it's my responsibility to some degree to say, we need to decenter whiteness, we need to decenter the Western European music tradition. And because if a person of color is doing that, it's going to have a different perception, like, well, they're just trying to, work their way in. And it's really on people like me to say, we have to take a look at our curriculum. We have to take a look at how we're programming. And if I'm ending every concert with a Black spiritual just because I know it's going to get a response, yeah, that is cultural appropriation, because it's serving the choir and we're looking good, even though we're including it, but we're using it in a way that's not normalizing it. It's tokenizing it.
Thanks for saying that, Ryan. And I agree. And like I said, I've been guilty. I've done the same thing, because we come from the same kind of educational background, which says, check the boxes off, make sure you include, these standard composers and these standard genres, and then go home or end with a banger, kind of thing. So I've also had to consider how I'm representing composers and stories in my concerts. It's not just something for white people alone to consider as they're compiling their concerts and how they're talking with their students. Some things I've considered kind of moving forward as I've been thinking more about this is there needs to be an equity in presentation. Like if I'm going to talk about culture for one piece, then I need to talk about culture for my next piece. If I'm going to use musical terminology that fits with one piece, and I need to explain the same thing in the next. Like a riff and a melisma are almost the exact same thing, but they're built on different harmonies, and one is notated and one is not. So if I can make that connection for my students, they go, oh, my voice can already move like that. However, one I've kind of create in my mind as I compose, and the other one someone wrote out for me. It's not that big of a barrier anymore. We're not just teaching people how to sing, but at the end of the day, we're teaching people how to sing. And it's our job, again, it's extra work on the educator's part to find the bits of education, find the bits of information that was not included in our curriculum, so that we can give that to our students, so that we can then create new curriculum for them. And we have to kind of stop the cycle that we have experienced as we begin to build our own curriculum. Another thing, my colleague and I, Haley, created like 5 points of like, how do we pick music that better represents practices that we're unfamiliar with. The first one is to check out with the publisher, that the publisher frequently promotes music that is not like Western traditional. If they do that and they do it well, then that is fantastic. That's a good thing to look for. If the music is by a culture bearer, that's also very important. So right now I've looked through our main music website is JW Pepper. If you type in Swahili, you're going to find a lot of Swahili music, but you're not going to find a lot of African composers. So that's important to consider, that to be, what is that? The word I'm thinking of, sorry, to consider who is writing the music and how they got that information. Did they just hear the phrase somewhere and go, let's add a drum? Or are they from that culture and have an experience with those words? Is the music in the original language that it was intended to perform? And that's another thing to consider. Sometimes the music will have a pronunciation guide at the front. That's also extremely helpful, because you don't want to assume that it just uses like ecclesiastical Latin vowels. And then the last thing you can look at in that piece of music is the research. Sometimes in the front cover of music, you'll see the composer's name, a translation of that at the bottom that says, this composer traveled to this country, spent time with, observed these practices happening. That is someone who's done the research. If they're still living, you can email them, and most of them answer their email and are happy to kind of say, you know what, that was actually my friend I got that information from. I have a recording of our conversation, and they'll send you that. So you can, if you're willing to spend the time, find it. But if you're short on time, thinking of the publisher, culture bearer, language, pronunciation guide, and research in the octavo or music is a kind of a quick way to say, I can do a little bit better. I'm a busy teacher. I can do a little bit better and look for these things as I'm trying to select music for my choir.
That's good. There's a question that just came in the QA, and I know, Ms. Davis, you need to leave. But the question is just, do Black choirs feel that to perform Western music, that they are appropriating another culture from you guys' perspectives?
I cannot leave without answering this one. So if I'm
I
late,
figured that. So that's why I said I'm going to stick it in there.
Southern ACDA, 2020. Ryan, were you there? Are you North Carolina? Is that in the southern region? It was in Mobile, Alabama, and there was a HBCU honor choir, an HBCU honor choir. And what I loved about this honor choir is because all year long I've heard, that's not my culture. I can't do that. I don't know anything about those people. I can't perform that. Like just different things from my majority colleagues, bless their heart. This choir started with historical European music. Pristine. They worked their way through every genre, every time period, and every single thing was good. All of it. There was no, I can't perform this because I'm not. It is, I respect music and I respect art, and this is the best I can give. And they slayed everybody. Like we were done. That was the best part of that conference for me, is that they were not restricted by race. They were not even like compelled. It wasn't like we can do this half better than this half. It was, we are humans who make music, who strive for excellence. And everything we perform here for you today will show that excellence. And boy, did they. And I turned to my friend and I was like, that's inclusion. From an all Black choir, that's inclusion, where they said, we're not only going to perform Black music by Black composers because we're Black. They said, we've got everyone. And by the way, it's stunning. And I just, that might have propelled all my research for the next year. Actually, everything that followed 2020 was something from that experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, Ms. Davis, that you were trained pretty much in the same Western European tradition as Dr. Luhrs, and so that's what too. So I imagine that when it's time to sing it, because it's been normalized and it's what we've been taught, it's like, okay, well, sing it. What do you think? Do you think it's part of just, that's how everyone's pretty much trained? And so
it's what you're used to. Like when I go to perform a gospel piece, I did not even grow up in a predominantly Black church. I don't have like a base knowledge of gospel music. So I have to consider meeting with a culture bearer, calling my friend who conducts the gospel choir and say, hey, what happens here? I want to do this right. Don't embarrass me. But there are people who will assume that they can ask me questions about how to prepare their gospel piece. I go, I don't know, Bach. I don't know. So it's education, it's intentional, it's time. So yeah, you have to intentionally study the things that you don't know. And now I need to intentionally study non-Western European music once I get my PhD and have time to do that. That is what I'll dedicate that time to, since I'll have a base knowledge of Western Europe.
We will keep you if you don't go, Miss Davis.
Okay, bye. I have a choir.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
It was a pleasure to speak.
Sure.
See ya.
Bye. That's great.
I didn't give the context before. Tis the season of choir performances, as Dr. Luhrs put it. So she's on her way to make art, and how fortunate are her students and her future audiences to have her.
Dr. Luhrs, I've been intrigued ever since I knew about your music and protest course that you teach at LR. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about it and, what you're doing, what the journey has been to, planning the course, teaching it the first time, getting student reaction. How's that journey been for you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. Interestingly, you heard in my bio as it was being read, I've liked to do these choral festivals, one-day choral festivals in the communities where I've lived, trying to draw on the diversity of that city, and actually was the topic of my dissertation. And I acknowledge I've always enjoyed doing that, and like the end, I feel like it's almost a glimpse of heaven that we have all these people from different places singing together and making music and singing each other's music. So you have one person who says, I got you on this one. I know how this one goes. The next one, the person next to them says, I got you on this one. I'll help you follow your spot. But there's something missing. You like, as the author and as Bradley mentioned, I could feel pretty good. I brought this together. Look at all the good things I did to make all these people in the same room. But at the end of the day, were we Like what were we changing? It felt good for a day, and maybe even possibly were we doing damage by giving the illusion that everything is all and well because we sang together, and then we go the next day. Are we thinking more about social justice? Are we thinking about the inequalities in the world? I don't know. I was a changed person. Why? Because I made mistakes, and I had told people told me that I made mistakes, and I was able to learn from that and hopefully be a better teacher because of the mistakes I made as I planned those events. But that also influenced, all right, how can music, there's no protest element in those joint choral events, but it got me more interested, especially, I'm sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but it's part of the journey. As part of the research is what kind of music brings people together, where we really feel more connected. And part of the research is finding that it's music where you're not using sheets, where you're not using sheet music in front of you, where you're interacting, where there's not a lot of text, where it's repetitive, and that's the time where we're feeling more connected and we're feeling like we're more socially cohesive, to use the research term. And that's what piqued my interest. Okay, so that's the music predominantly that's emerging when we have these joint events emerging from the African American cultures. What have they figured out? Or what's going on with that? Why is that happening? And that's what led me into a journey about protest music and how is music functioning there. Yes, there were some hymns being sung, but a lot of the music in protest settings are these cyclically structured, meaning repetitive songs, zipper songs, where you can zipper in a word, whoever you're protesting, and change the word for each verse. So you can sing for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes, and became more and more fascinated with how music functioned there, not to be recorded, but for people who were facing hoses and dogs and being thrown in cars and being beat up, we're singing together as a form of survival, a form of unity. And you see that across protest groups and across cultures. So part of the class, we really go in depth with African American civil rights movement. And that's pretty well documented. There are lots of musical examples to look at. But then I love the part where the students find a protest movement and bring something in themselves and present on it. Then we try to look for, is there a thread running through all of these as we investigate? And how are people in Hong Kong protesting compared to anywhere in the country? How are people using music and art to protest their cause? And we find the commonality is often, like I mentioned before, people aren't being treated as they're fully human, and it seems like they're using art to get to that point.
Absolutely. I imagine it's probably a pretty transformative class for everyone involved. I'm wondering though, in the Bradley text that you had us to read, Bradley draws on the work of Bell Hooks, and Harlech, who recommends that that all teachers, if teaching about these issues of social justice, race, etc., that they need to bring certain topics into the conversations. They need to have provocative questions. They need to navigate predictable debates, and they need to talk more about talking, that should be core to the praxis, their classroom practice. I wonder what you think about that and how much provocative questions played into your pedagogy and how much navigating debates or exploratory, do you bring out tensions?
I will say that is an area where I'm hoping I can show a growth mindset, because it's very challenging. And I'll admit, I hide behind the art sometimes, because I feel like the artistic expressions that people bring to the class that show the challenges, I can see, because we're in an age of YouTube and we can see things from all over the globe. And I've found that some of those transformative moments are not happening because of conversation that I'm leading, but as they're seeing, I never thought of that group. I see more of that group's humanity because of the art that I'm observing. And I will admit, I struggle with leading those hard conversations. I try, and I want to get better at that. And I sometimes hide behind the art because I can see the transforming happening through the art. But yeah, I read that and go, I need to do better. I need to do better at that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your transparency. One last question from that I think would be a great way to close. This is from Susan. She says that as a non-music educator, untrained voice, white person, I would love to learn and sing all kinds of music in a group community setting. Is this something that's happening anywhere, and any ideas on promoting locally?
Yeah,
Anybody
I should
feel
have.
like this? Go ahead.
That's a great question, and especially to do it on an ongoing basis. Sadly, there's not. It's usually an ad hoc thing, or we've sometimes done community sings, or it's people singing in the aftermath of a tragedy, like I mentioned before. But usually it's tied to an institution, right? Where they're different, and whether it's a church, a school, or in a community chorus isn't tied to an institution, but that's also presenting concerts. So there's a real lack. And if there's a hunger for that and an appetite for that kind of music and that kind of singing, let's figure something out, because we can get people together to sing just for the sake of singing. Why not?
That's a great way to end. And so we'll look forward to posting about that in our
There
announcement
you go.
when the first one will happen. But now it is 7:00 p.m. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Dr. Luhrs, for joining us and for just preparing this, awesome week with such great materials. Thank you all to all of you who are logged on and viewing. Know that the recording of tonight's discussion will be posted on Canvas and YouTube. And look forward to next week, when we will be joined by Reverend Kermit Moss, who is a professor of theology at the Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary in Columbia, which is a part of LR. He will unpack diversity across religious traditions, as well as the intersection of theology with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we look forward to that. You all have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, too. You are doing it right, Dr. Luhrs. You're a model and an example to me, and the way that you model making mistakes is awesome. So you're being too humble. Way to go, Dr. Luhrs.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.